I will be speaking today on gun violence, particularly in the wake of the Douglas High School tragedy in Florida. I will not be speaking of the wretch that committed this cowardly, foul act. Such vermin thrive on attention, and I'm not going to give him any attention. So join me today in the struggle for knowledge, the battle for truth. I'm Stephen Arms, and welcome to I'm putting forth for your consideration some options as to help prevent future gun violence tragedies. I did some thinking about this over the last week and came up with 5 points. Gun control, improved background checks, social media, mental health, and the hardening of targets. Now, gun control. I've spoken on the Second Amendment in past videos. The right to keep and bear arms is guaranteed by the Constitution of the United States. If you want to change that, then you need to amend the Constitution, and there's a process for that. If not, then you basically need to shut up and deal with it. I'm not trying to be flippant, but I'm really rather tired of this issue. Guns are part of our American history, as is freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and freedom of religion. If you made all guns illegal, you would simply open up a massive black market for the sales of illegal guns, and only criminals would have guns, including probably 20 or 30% of law-abiding American citizens who would buy them illegally because they wanted to have weapons to protect their families and homes, including myself. Now, as to improved background checks, local news today's news actually gave me information on that because a White House spokesman, his name is Raj Shah today, spoke on background checks and said that for the White House, that we want to make sure that background checks process is fully staffed and all information gets into it. President Trump has taken an interest in bipartisan Senate legislation that would strengthen the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, the NIC-BCS, which of course is the national database for gun sellers that helps prevent the purchase of guns by criminals, the mentally ill, and others considered too dangerous to own a firearm. Now, the mental health issue in that runs up against what we currently have in the United States, which are called HIPAA laws. HIPAA is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. This is when you go to the doctor and they talk about that you're signing your documents on HIPAA releases, that you can only release information to proper people and all that. The Obama administration in its time made modifications to HIPAA that were allegedly designed to help identify those who were prohibited by specific mental illness reasons from being able to having firearms. Well, the only real problem with that is that the identities of those individuals were already being provided to the NIC-BCS, and it basically rendered any modification the Obamas did as being moot. It had basically no real impact on healthcare providers because it was so narrow in its scope, and this is an issue. The ability to have medical confidentiality is important, but the ability for people who have violent tendencies or potential to be violent because of mental illness also needs to be available so that those people cannot purchase firearms. Now, as to social media, I've noticed that social media has no problem at all monitoring itself. It has no problem going after conservative comments or anybody who disagrees with their basic precepts. So surely they could pass on terrorist information and viable threats to law enforcement. Perhaps they should be more interested in the safety of the people and the public rather than promoting some ideological agenda of their own. Now, mental health is a more complicated issue, and I was going to speak on it quite extensively, and I decided to distill it down to a smaller level for the purpose of this video. In 1960, there were 500,000 patients in mental institutions in the United States of America. The population at the time was about 180 million people. Currently, we have about 325 million people, nearly twice what it was then. And there are more than 356,000 people with mental illnesses who are incarcerated in prisons and in jails, as to opposed to around 35,000 who are receiving treatment in state hospitals. This, I personally think, is outlandish. It's ridiculous. We're putting people in prisons rather than giving them the ability to get the treatment that they need to help improve their lives. We have gone back to the levels of patients and institutions that the United States had in the 1850s. Now the solution is we have outpatients, we have them come in, we give them pills, and we tell them to come back in a month. They may talk a little about their problems, and then they just send them on their way. I unfortunately have seen this. There is a need for state facilities to house those who are a danger to themselves and others, as well as those who cannot take care of themselves. If you think being mentally ill and living in an institution is harsh, try being mentally ill and living on the streets. That's only harsh, it's dangerous and potentially deadly. Better mental health care equals fewer violent people on the street, which in turn means a more peaceful and lawful society. Now, as to hardening targets, the simple answer is soft targets need to be hardened, but that is difficult because unless you wish to live in a fortress, it's impossible to harden all targets or protect all people. But I did, over the weekend, I watched the Greg Gutfeld show. I do that occasionally because I particularly like one of the people on it, who is Tyrus. I find Tyrus to be very intelligent and very insightful. And I'm going to steal from him on this with my apologies. I hope he doesn't come after me because he's also a very big fellow. Tyrus pointed out that after 9/11, we ended up with the TSA, that airlines and airports changed entirely because of 9/11. We got used to the idea of getting too early to being checked into planes, having to take our shoes off, and seeing people with automatic weapons and guard dogs patrolling our airports. But we adapted to it. Now we have a situation where our children are being threatened in their schools. Well, then we need to harden those targets. And I think the particularly brilliant idea that Tyrus came up was that returning vets coming back from the war end up at about 4 or 5% unemployment rate. Well, who would be better suited than a person who served their country, who has military training, who has discipline, who is able to take orders, who's able to be observant to threats? Who is a better choice than to protect our children? Could there be a greater service than they're protecting the children of America in their schools? I think most of them would jump at the opportunity because it gives them a good job and an honorable position and allows them to use some of the skills that they learned in the service. Like I said, I think it's a brilliant idea. I'm going to be wrapping up now, and I want to offer my condolences to the bereaved families in Florida for their losses. Condolences is an inadequate word. We should have a better one. As a parent, I know that no parent wants to outlive their child. I'm sorry to end on a dark, solemn note, but this is a dark, solemn issue. Thank you very much.